happens to the Prime Minister? Today is a Brexit vote. I love election days. No, it's not necessarily election day, but the Brexit vote in and of itself feels like an election day. Today was a historic day. A historic day. Whether you want to call it great or not is perspective, but it was a historic day, particularly if you're living in the UK and you are watching the Prime Ministers and essentially the MPs argue and debate. They've argued for days. They've haggled for days. The Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement was supposed to be put up for a vote last month after they again haggled for days about it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they had 5 days of arguing back and forth. You can watch 7 hours of them going back and forth today if you want to watch 7 hours of them go back and forth today. But all of it, all of the years of the wrangling back and forth, the years of going back and forth with the European Union, haggling, fighting, coming to some resolution, with the Prime Minister finally having the bill, the withdrawal bill, that she herself has worked on and crafted. All of these people that's been resigning from her administration, all of these people who've come out against her from the standpoint of this Brexit bill, you can call it a BNO, the Brexit and only bill. Prime Minister finally has her come to Jesus moment with the withdrawal agreement. And the ministers get to put their stamp on whether or not they're going to go with the withdrawal agreement. The Prime Minister has tried to make this a Brexit, from my standpoint, or no deal at all. The European Union said, we're not making any further negotiations. This is what you're going to get. The Prime Minister had to go back to the European Union and this humiliating thing of begging them for changes, to which case they told her, they whispered like Rorschach, no. So this is what you got. This is the vote as it took place. Like I said, today was a historic day, and not in the Prime Minister's favor. And the historicness of the day wasn't just the fact that it was a Brexit vote, but to clue you in, to make this slightly anticlimactic. But the level of failure, the government has never been voted down in the history of the UK in a margins such as this. Take a look at this. This is the Brexit vote. I made a clip from C-SPAN, so let's do it.
Position is on the right-hand side benches of your picture. The government benches are on the left-hand side behind Theresa May and her cabinet ministers. So we can now see the tellers beginning to assemble in front of the table here, and the government tellers, Wendy Morton and Ian Stewart, are sort of edging towards the government side of the chamber in a way that almost looks as if they're taking a position to announce that they've lost, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. As you can tell, the expectant hum. This is one of those big Commons occasions where the atmosphere becomes absolutely electric, partly because there are just so many people jammed in. It always produces a tension of its own.
Could also add, in terms of the seating, that in front of the speaker, viewers will be able to see 3 people sat at a table. They are the clerks who advise the speaker on procedure, engage with members about procedural matters. They keep check on time and so on. The most senior clerk, as we look at the picture, the most senior clerk is David Nartzler. He sits at the left-hand side, and then you have 2 other clerks.
And here we go.
Order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Did you hear them gasp? Did you hear them gasp? When they initially named, she said the ayes to the right, 202, and they're like, oh my God. Never before have we seen such a beating on this. They didn't even get to the number of votes for the other one because you can just do the math based on the number of people who were there. Let's keep going for this, though. This is utterly brutal, and I'm going to show Theresa May's response to this because, look, at the end of the day, you've just been punched in the face in front of everybody on national television with the world watching. Like, imagine that. You're standing outside of a bar with television cameras plugged into the entirety of the world, and somebody just walks up and hits you in the nose. Now, your response to this, as a politician, has to be politically correct, despite the fact that you've just been hit in the face with a bag of nickels. Let's take a look at this and take a look at Theresa May. I love the pomp and circumstance of this, but this is a brutal, brutal verdict.
To the right, 202. The nose, order. The eyes to the right, 202. The nose to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. On a point of order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order, order. There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition declined to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness, and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
Theresa May has somewhat of a point here. Saying what you don't want, meaning voting this down, her taking this kind of brutal throttling in this way, doesn't necessarily tell you what you actually do want. It is going to be the responsibility of the government within the course of, if I'm not mistaken, 3 days to come back and give an assessment on Plan B. What are you going to do next? So, fact of the matter is, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know if the government, in this case, is going to be able to retain its governmentness, meaning the government could fall apart depending on whether or not she exceeds what is going to be a confidence vote. That is going to be another video altogether. But for this video, I wanted to just give a heads up on what was taking place to our friends with the special relationship across the pond. Let's see. What is this? But by the way, we really don't know what's coming up next. We don't necessarily know what the Plan B is. It is possible that Parliament could countermand the entirety of this. It's possible that they can have another referendum. It is possible that they have an election. All of those things are on the table. All of those things are possible. This is somewhat uncharted territory. It is possible that the UK crashes out of the European Union because they don't have a consensus for anything. Meaning they don't necessarily have a consensus across the House for any particular policy. So you end up with this thing where, regardless of what comes up, there's not enough people to get it across the finish line. I am extraordinarily doubtful that the DUP leaves Theresa May's side. Meaning just because they voted it down doesn't necessarily mean that the DUP is going to jump ship to Labour. It's also questionable whether or not, meaning if Jeremy Corbyn is going to call a no confidence vote, if that, the question becomes, does enough people leave Theresa May's side, meaning from the Conservatives that are backing up the Conservative government, do enough leave for her to essentially lose the no confidence vote? I'm extremely skeptical. I mean, if the Tories themselves voted to keep her, the DUP would be the doom bringer on this and be the deciding factor on whether or not they're going to leave her in order to collapse the government. Up to this point, what I've read was the DUP is not leaving her. Thatcher in the Rye. I feel like I've lost 2.5 years of my life dealing with Thatcher in the Rye. Thatcher in the Rye is an understatement. Thatcher in the Rye is an understatement. Patrick. Oh, thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm not going to keep this particular one long because I have another one after this. But I like showing the beginning when people are talking and you're just seeing, the people moving in the background. It's like it's an electric atmosphere. And then it comes in and these guys are standing with this kind of British tradition and they're like 202 for their eyes and people are like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And then they recall the entire vote and you're like, oh my God, she got walloped. Like that throttling could have came at the first of the year, but in December. But keep in mind, she was trying over the course of the month to essentially beg, cajole, and get people on her side so she wouldn't lose like this. And that twat, David Cameron, she's also right, left her in this position when David Cameron lost the vote. David Cameron essentially gave up the prime ministership to whoever would take it on. Theresa May was just so happened to want to take it on. And that other twat, Gordon, I can't think of his last name right now. I'm about to say Gordon Brown. It's not Gordon Brown. If you remember, he was also in contention to run for the prime ministership because he was one of these people who were part of the Brexiteers. And then he pulled his name out of the running for the race of the prime minister. You ended up with Theresa May. Gordon, Jesus Christ, what is his last name? Gordon. It'll come to me. I swear it'll come to me. But Varoufakis is fighting the EU suicide. Yeah, the EU is not perfect, but these guys are. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that these guys are going to leave the EU without being, injured in some way. That injury would happen with any organization that kind of enmeshed itself with something else, and then they're going to try to extricate yourself from it. But this is not Brexit. And this seems to be a worst case scenario, meaning if you're going to accept this particular Brexit plan, you might as well stay into the European Union. By the same token, you voted to leave. And there's something odd about the democratic process when you hold a referendum like that, and then you ignore the will of the referendum, or you keep having a referendum until you get the vote that you want. It's very possible, though. The door has been open for anything to happen, meaning it is possible that they get rid of the Article 51, Article 50 that they call for it, or that they remand it. It is possible that they decide to have another referendum. Then the question becomes, what's on the referendum? It is possible they crash out of the European Union. There's several things that are on the table as a possibility. What comes up, nobody knows. We are going to wait for the Prime Minister to give us her plan B. So I'll leave it here. The EU is a failed predatory system that cannibalizes weaker members. Yes, it does cannibalize weaker members. I don't necessarily know if it started that way, though. But, any organization that you have that's going to be big at a certain point takes a life on it of its own. And you can make an argument that in some sense it's predatory. In some sense, it helps some of the smaller nations. That's not true. I mean, the nations that are at the top part have somewhat of an economic advantage than the nations at the bottom, but that's because they were trying to meld these various currencies into one currency, and it created the EU has problems. I just say it that way. The EU has problems. Boris Johnson. Thank you, Boris Johnson. If you remember, Boris Johnson initially was in the running. Boris Johnson, when the prime ministership came up, was in the running to be prime minister. And he pulled his name out of the running, out of contention. When Theresa May took office, Theresa May bought him on because he was one of those initial Brexiteers. And she was like, well, if you're gonna take a hit, you're going to be standing right here beside me. Now, as this went on, it seems like Boris Johnson had a perspective in what he wanted to do. Boris Johnson, if he wanted to maintain that perspective, could have actually ran for the prime ministership. He had a chance of winning. That said, Theresa May, as Gardner has put, is a sin eater and is going to take the hit for all of the stuff. That said, that's kind of getting off the point. Historic defeat for the government. Twat Cameron and Twat Johnson, yes. Calling both of them twats. And just for formality's sake before I end this, as many as 114 Conservative MPs had been expected to rebel on the morning of the vote, but the actual number turned out to be slightly higher at 118. We thought she was only to take a beating by 114. It ended up being worse. This meant that the government lost the vote on whether to accept the withdrawal agreement by a margin of 202 to 432, with the majority of the 230 being a record defeat in the Commons in modern political era. The Telegraph has a list of each MP that voted. I'll leave it here. I'm going to have one more video after this on this very specific topic, but I will leave this one here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like the video. And I probably should vary that because after a while people get familiar with you saying that and just kind of ignore it. But I appreciate all the support you guys give us on these videos because I have no idea which video they're going to demonetized. They still go into demonetized video. They demonetized a video I did on Sanders, and the women calling sexual, the sexual assault allegations on the Sanders video. How are you demonetizing that video? Some of this stuff is utter nonsense. But if you find yourself coming back here often, please feel free to share the content, like the video if you like the video, and if you can assist with some kind of donation, please consider doing so. So I'll end it here. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you in about 5-10 minutes.